Salute a tutti, and welcome to this episode of Ciao DMV, Italian American Life in the DMV. My name is Joseph Barone, and I will be your host. This podcast channel is dedicated to all things Italian and Italian American in the DMV, aka DC, Maryland, and Virginia. My focus is on the Italian American experience, from family stories to little known history to businesses to cultural events, etc. Mostly the good, but sometimes the not so good. According to Mary Elizabeth Brown, the author of the book An Italian American Community of Faith, Holy Rosary in Washington, D.C., 1913 to 2015, she wrote that the Italian festival began 2 days after the groundbreaking of Villa Rosa in Mitchellville, Maryland on September 15, 1963. So it began September 17, 1963. Unfortunately, the Italian festival at Villa Rosa Nursing Home is no more. Today, I have with me Ken Harris, who will share some of his memories. So, welcome, Ken.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you very much for being here with me and sharing your memories of the Italian festival at Villa Rosa. So, Ken, can you tell me, where did you grow up? And if you left the area, when did you leave the area?
We grew up in Hillcrest Heights, Maryland, and I stayed there uh, all through college, went to the University of Maryland, and then I moved out to Montgomery County probably in the late 80s, early 90s.
Okay, so you basically have remained in the area the entire time.
Yes.
Okay. And tell us about your family history a little bit, your affiliation with Italy.
Okay. So, the last name's Harris, but the predominant influence in my life has been Italian. My mother's maiden name was Nicolosi. On her mother's side, it was Genua. And in that area, I saw my grandparents every day of the week. It was just a normal way of growing up. So that was the predominant influence. Italian family. My grandmother had 9 brothers and 2 sisters. So, like many of us in that area, I had hundreds of cousins. So every birthday party, you didn't have to go outside the family. You just, you called up, made 3 phone calls, and you had 20 people over at your house. And then I grew up in Hillcrest Heights, where it was a confluence basically of Italian Americans that had started out maybe in Washington, D.C., North Capitol Street, and made the progression. And so we had a little pocket of Italians there on Iverson Street and Hillcrest Heights. And there were, bricklayers and barbers and blue collar workers. And it was just a great experience. So that was my childhood.
So who are some of the people, just before we get into the festival memory, who are some of the people you palled around with in those days?
Yeah, so I grew up on Jamison Street there in Hillcrest Heights off 23rd Parkway. So I grew up with the Tenaglias, Angelo and Paolo and Rocco, their cousins Nick and Danny and Ado and Massimo, and then right next door to them were the Chanchos, Enzo and his brothers Andrea and Stevie. There were the Kruppies, John and Maria, and then we had the Frannies, Placido and Carmela. And it was just an incredible time. It's so different from today, where you just woke up in the morning. We didn't have air conditioning, so we all slept with our windows open. And you looked outside and you heard a basketball bouncing or a soccer ball being kicked, and you knew, okay, the day started. So it was incredible because we didn't need organized sports. We just went outside and played with one another. We convened at Hillcrest Heights, and then we together with some of the other neighborhood kids, the Finellis, John, Joe, and Danny, and Gino Antonelli lived up the street, Franco Smeraldo, and you just convened at Hillcrest Heights after school, 4 o'clock, and you were going to have 10 people, 12 people, 14 people. I mean, yeah, it was a lot, a very cost effective way to have fun. Our parents didn't spend a lot of money on sports camps.
What a great way to grow up. That is a fantastic way to grow up with all of those kids and just playing in the streets and having a grand old time every single day.
Yeah, and no social media, thank goodness.
Yeah. 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 So tell me, what is your very, very first memory of the Italian festival, and what year would that be?
So I was racking my brain about this, and I'm pretty sure that it was 1972. And the reason I remember it is because President Nixon came. And so that makes sense to me because that would have been an election year. And I would conclude that he would, leave Camp David, and they were on Sundays, right? And it makes sense right there 2 months before the election that he would make that trip. So that was my initial memory, about 1972, and it was just so much fun. So the Italians in my neighborhood, they belonged to the Orsonia Club, and they were in charge of the porchetta stand. So the moms were all there making the food and everything, and we just, partook and helped them. Everybody pitched in, and just, the fun and the games. And when you're that age, we probably didn't care as much about food as we do now. Food wasn't the most part, as we were running around playing the games. There were always, it was always fun, that gambling aspect when you're a little kid. You put your quarter on the number and you watch the wheel, and they had the Vegas tickets and things like that. And me and my family, again, they were card players and, nickel Annie, and you thought it was all the money in the world the way they acted. But that was a fun aspect of it, taking your money, your allowance money, and putting it on a number and hoping the guy would spin it for you. So yeah, and then they stopped doing it after a while, but remember the grease pole? The guys used to climb up the grease pole, and that was, always exciting at the time. Obviously, we were only like 6 or 7 at the time, and I think it was, above our pay grade, but that was always fun to watch. But yeah, early '70s, and, when you're a kid, everything just seems so much bigger than it really is, and it was wondrous.
And when you got there, do you have any other memories of any of the other games or food that was there?
Well, I mean, I just remember an abundance, they're just, you just went, and, you had all these stands. They had a bingo game, and some of the men would play bocce, and I guess they had horse rides. But, the fun part of it to me was, the gambling aspect, and, trying to win prizes. And, my grandparents were big supporters of the bingo, and they loved those Las Vegas ripoff tickets where 50 cents and you had a chance. And for the longest time, the Ruzzi family would run it, and that was a great thing about the Italian festival through the years. It sort of became like a class reunion. You go back every year, and you had the same families running the same. That's how the church, is always looking for volunteers, and it was great to see everybody. And when you're a kid, you see everybody anyway, so maybe it's not a big deal. But as we got older, it's kind of nice to run into everybody. And as life gets busy, for some people, that might be the only chance you get to see them every year.
Very true. And do you remember the last time you went to the festival?
Yeah, that would have been, I think, about 2017. So, and at that point, I'm coming as an adult, and I brought my mom, who at that time was near the end. She was suffering from dementia, but that was, sort of a memory, one of those moments what gave her some clarity that, because she, it's funny. I mean, I don't want to get dark here, but, dementia, there's a lot of bad days, a lot of bad hours, but then there's always that hour or two a day that you have some clarity. And music's always a big part of that. I mean, she might have forgotten, what she had to eat 5 minutes ago, but they start playing an Italian song or something like that from 1940 or whatever, and she'd get up and she started dancing, and it was wonderful memory. So yeah, it was like 2017, 2017, and it was wonderful. I mean, at that point, you come back and you're older, and you're a business person, and you're looking around and you're thinking, wow, this is just wonderful. But you see the line at the pizza stand there, it's 30 deep, and you're like, wow, we could, couldn't we do better? Couldn't we make this more efficient? And I took my wife one year, and she loved the fried dough. And so we went over, and it was over in that, you remember they had the covered area
Mhm.
when you first walk in, and that's where they were doing the fried dough. And I went over and I said, is there fried dough? And they said, no, we're not having it this year. The lady that usually does it is in the hospital. And I'm like, "Oh, man, what an opportunity lost." And it was kinda a little frustrating and sad in a lot of ways, and that's the church relied on just volunteers to do it, and when one person goes down, it's like, "Oh my god, this is your one shot a year to do this." Could we have become more efficient? But maybe that's the beauty of it. You rely on volunteers, you wait in line an hour and a half for pizza. I mean, so it goes.
Yeah, yeah. And it's sad to see these things go, but they all run on volunteers. And as the older generation disappears, the younger generation moves away. We don't get involved in these things like our parents did. And the club is gone. Do you have any memories of the Orsino Club, the club that your parents belonged to? Any memories in particular about that? which I know is not part normally of this particular podcast, but since you mentioned it and others have mentioned it, some of the guys you palled around with it, do you have any memories you'd like to share about that off the top of your head?
Yeah, so I mean, so we didn't belong to the Ursonia Club. My family on the genuine Nicolosi side were from Sicily, but all the guys in the neighborhood, they were part of the Ursonia Club. So I kind of lived vicariously through them. So when they had events or things like that, we would usually pal around. So yeah, no specific memories about that. It's just the camaraderie of it all, Joe. It's funny, and as you grow up in this area, and I'm really excited about your podcast. It's interesting to me how a lot of our families, we started in North Capitol Street, and you had this progression out to Hillcrest Heights and Marlow Heights, and then I know there's groups in Chillum. Our friends had connections there, and all of a sudden, they joined a bowling league in Chillum, and then all of a sudden, you're introduced to 5 or 6 other Italian families, and you kind of spread out, and it's like you're part of a club,
Mhm.
which is pretty cool. And it's nice as you grow older, and you have families around the country, and it's just always to know to have a friendly face. And listen, if your daughter, we're in South Carolina right now. If you've got somebody here that needs a place to stay or a Sunday dinner, we're the door's always open.
Great, thanks. Any other memories, Ken, about the Italian festival or anything else you'd like to share? And where in Sicily, that remind me, where in Sicily are your folks from?
So that was my grandparents' side, and I'll be honest with you, Joe. We were kind of so my grandparents were actually born here. So we were unlike a lot of my friends whose parents were born in Italy. We had the Italian American experience, but they never went back. They never went back to Italy or something like that. So I think we were more maybe Americanized than some of the others, and they didn't talk about it. So
Any last thoughts about the Italian American festival or anything else growing up?
it was always, I guess, a catch-22 because it was always that, what, 2nd week in September, so school had just started, so you gotta go to school the next day, and you're kinda bummed out about that, but, I guess, there was always, like, a Redskin game on or something like that, so you were always looking for a TV and kinda following that, as well, but, again, it was just a wonderful time. You had just gone through a summer, with our friends. You had just finished canning tomatoes, so your house smelled really good. You were getting ready for the fall, and then you had the Italian festival, and that kind of kicked things off. And it was just, yeah, it was just wonderful. Just a glorious time, a celebration. And you kind of wish it lasted a couple of days, but then you realize, oh my God, they're relying on volunteers and they're working hard, and you don't think about all the setup that goes into it and the permits and things like that. I also remember it just dawned on me you remember the nuns used to go around and they were selling parts of the fig tree. They would, sell branch or something like that from the that you could go back and, plant your fig tree in 3 or 4 years that would come up for you.
Yeah,
So,
that's not for I didn't move up to the area until 91 and didn't start attending until probably 91, 92.
okay,
So for me, I have no memories of that festival other than from the period of about 91, 92, and on and off until about 2015, 2017.
okay,
So that's a tidbit that I didn't know about and I think those were the Scalabrini sisters who worked at Villa Rosa. Since the Scalabrini order had a group of nuns, I think they worked. So that's an interesting tidbit that I didn't know about, selling of uh, fig tree shoots so that you can grow your own fig tree.
yes, yes.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
that was a big deal, and, my grandparents had a fig tree, and that was one of our things. My sister and I would have to go out early in the morning to pick the figs before the birds got to them, like my grandfather would say. And it's funny because we're part-time residents now of South Carolina, and I actually planted a fig tree about 2 years ago, so I'm, fingers crossed that, here, hopefully in a year or 2, we'll have some figs, and
Excellent.
my grandkids will be able to go out and pick them. So,
Excellent.
yeah, those are just things that kinda stay with you, and, yeah, great, wonderful memories.
Well, great. Well, Ken, I want to take this opportunity to thank you for remembering the Italian festival. And to all my listeners, I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode on remembering the Italian festival. I hope that you've enjoyed it, and I hope that it may have brought back some memories for you. If you're interested in being on this podcast, please feel free to contact me at ciao@gmail.com. That's ciao, CIAO, DMV@gmail.com. And please remember, If you enjoy listening to this episode, please take a moment to like, comment, subscribe, and or even share with a friend. This is Joseph Barone, your host, signing out. Ciao for now.